My father wants me to reconcile with him because they had a baby. Hi everyone. This is my first time posting here, so please bear with. My name is Nick, and I'm 16. I was born to very young parents. My mom was just 16, and my dad was 17. To say they were unprepared for the responsibility of raising a child would be an understatement. Both families, meaning my maternal and paternal grandparents, decided that the best course of action would be for my maternal grandparents to step in and raise me. That way, my parents could continue with their lives without being burdened with the responsibilities of parenthood. This wasn't one of those situations you see in movies where the mother pretends the daughter's child is her own. No, everyone, including me, knew who my biological parents were. There was no attempt to deceive me or hide the truth. I've always known that my mom and dad were just kids themselves when they had me, but knowing the truth didn't make things any easier. When my dad turned 18, he moved out of town. My mom stayed at my grandparents' house for several more years. She lived with us until she was 23, which meant she was still around when I was little, at least in theory. But her presence didn't translate into a real relationship. She treated me more like an annoying little brother than a son. She didn't like spending time with me and never showed any interest in the things that mattered to me. School events? She didn't come to a single one. Homework or academic achievements? She couldn't have cared less. Fun outings or quality time? Forget about it. Whenever I tried to tell her about my day or share something exciting, she'd roll her eyes or cut me off mid-sentence to talk about something else. It was clear that she didn't want to engage with me. When she finally moved out of my grandparents' house, I was around 7. At that point, I'd already stopped expecting much from her. But it still hurt when she barely made any effort to see me after that. Her visits were limited to family gatherings where she'd throw me a half-hearted hi and then avoid eye contact for the rest of the time. By then, my grandparents had become my real parents in every way that mattered, and I started thinking of my mom as more of an acquaintance I couldn't quite avoid. My dad's absence was a different story. He had moved far away and only came back to visit once or twice a year, usually around the holidays. When he did visit, he would make an effort to spend time with me. He'd take me to the movies or out to eat at my favorite restaurant, things like that. On paper, it sounds nice, but the truth is, I barely knew him. He felt more like a kind stranger than a father. When I compared my dad to my friends' dads, the ones who picked them up from school, went to their sports games, and played with them on weekends, it just didn't add up. How could this man, who I only saw once or twice a year, be considered my dad? It wasn't that I hated him, it's just that there was no real connection. Fast forward to a year ago, and things took a surprising turn. My dad moved back to the same city where I live. He started reaching out more, wanting to hang out and build some kind of relationship. Sometimes I went along with it, but honestly, I wasn't all that interested. I didn't hate him, but I didn't feel close to him either. One cool thing, though, was that he set up a room for me in his apartment. It's in the city center, so it felt kind of exciting, even if I didn't plan on spending much time there. Then came the real shocker. My mom and dad started hanging out. Behind everyone's backs, they rekindled whatever connection they had, and a few months later, they announced they were dating. I didn't know what to say. It felt like they were springing this whole happy family thing on me out of nowhere. They asked me to move in with them at my dad's apartment, saying we could finally be a family. I refused immediately. I wasn't ready to uproot my life, and I didn't even see them as my parents in the traditional sense. They didn't take my refusal well, but thankfully, my grandma stepped in. She pointed out that switching school districts would be a huge inconvenience and that I'd lose all my friends. That argument seemed to work for the time being, and the situation calmed down. But my parents didn't let the idea go. They started pressuring me to spend more time with them, and it quickly became overwhelming. Here's the thing. I don't have any major beef with my dad. He was absent for most of my life, but at least he wasn't outright cruel. My mom, on the other hand, has always treated me poorly. I feel like she's only trying to make amends now because she knows my dad wants me there, and she doesn't want to lose face. Last week, things came to a head. Both of them showed up at my grandparents' house with big news. They announced that they were buying a house nearby so I could finally move in with them. I immediately said no. When they countered that changing schools was no longer an issue, I felt cornered. I blurted out that the problem wasn't the school. It was that I didn't see them as my parents and didn't want to live with them. That's when they dropped the bombshell. My mom is pregnant. They said this was a chance to finally be a real family, complete with a new baby. I lost it. I told them they were the worst parents in the world, and that they had no business bringing another child into the mix when they'd already abandoned. I said they'd never apologize for treating me like a mistake and dumping their responsibilities onto my grandparents. My mom called me a brat and said she wasn't going to make the same mistakes twice. I fired back that she'd never even raised me to begin with. My dad tried to defend her, saying they were young and doing the best they could. I told him their best wasn't good enough. I stormed out of the room and broke down. It's been a tough week. They've both been calling and texting, but I've ignored them. My grandparents have been supportive and agree that I shouldn't move in with my parents. They understand why I'm upset, but they also think my parents are trying to start fresh now that they're older and more stable. I can't help but feel left behind in all of this. Update. Hi everyone. I just wanted to start by saying thank you for all the responses and support. It's been an emotional few days, and while my thoughts are a bit scattered, I felt I owed you all an update. I'll try my best to lay everything out clearly. For those of you who didn't catch my original post, here's a quick recap. I'm 16, and my parents had me when they were very young. My mom was 16, and my dad was 17. After they separated, they left me to be raised by my maternal grandparents, who are amazing people and essentially became my real parent. My mom was technically around during my early years, but she never cared for me in the way a parent should. And my dad moved away, visiting only sporadic. Fast forward to now. My dad has returned, he and my mom are back together, and they're expecting a baby. They want me to be part of their new family, but I've refused. That brings us to today's update. First, I shared my original post with my grandparents. Their reaction caught me off guard. They were so surprised by the overwhelming number of comments praising them. They were genuinely moved to see how many people could see the incredible effort they've put into raising. For me, it was an opportunity to express how much I love and appreciate them. I told them they've been the best parents I could have asked for, and nothing will ever change that. There were a lot of tears, and they told me how proud they were of. They said they didn't think they were doing anything extraordinary, just taking care of family. But to me, and clearly to so many others, they've done something truly special. Once I had that conversation with my grandparents, I started trying to organize my thoughts about my dad. There were so many things I needed to address. Why he abandoned me, why he thought he could just reappear and expect me to accept him as a father, and why he thought I'd be okay moving in with them when I don't even consider them my parents in the traditional sense. I decided to meet with him and have a real conversation about everything. We met at a park, and when he arrived, he immediately tried to hug me. I stepped away, which I think hurt him. But he didn't say anything about it. Instead, he apologized for how things went down the other day and launched into this speech about how we could transition into living together part-time, respecting my boundaries and all that. Honestly, I went blank. I hadn't expected him to start talking right away, so I pulled out my phone and showed him my original post. He read it in silence, his expression shifting as he went through the comments. When he finished, he looked up at me and asked if everything in the post was true. I told him it was. He said he'd answer any questions I had honestly, so I started with the biggest one. What happened when I was born? My dad took a deep breath and explained everything. He said that when my mom found out she was pregnant, all options were on the table. Abortion, adoption, marriage, my grandparents raising me, or one of them taking sole custody. My mom was terrified of adoption because of some horror stories she'd heard from a religious group about how mothers who give up their babies are doomed. So, she initially wanted to give me up for adoption, but my dad refused. He couldn't stand the thought of his child growing up somewhere without him ever knowing what happened. Instead, he proposed to becoming my sole caretaker and giving up his college plans to stay in the city. However, his parents weren't on board with that idea. They believed he should pursue higher education, so he could provide for me financially in the long run. They offered to take care of me themselves, but they were much older than my maternal grandparents, already in their 60s. So my maternal grandparents stepped in. They were younger, and since my mom would need support too, they decided it was best for me to stay with them. After I was born, my mom suffered from postpartum depression. The doctors advised against completely separating me from her, fearing it could worsen her condition and damage any potential relationship we might have. My grandparents tried to create an environment where she could bond with me, but it never really happened. One thing my dad mentioned that I didn't know before was that even while he was in college, he worked part-time to pay child support. Once he started working at a law firm, he sent more money to my grandparents and even set up a college fund for it. My grandparents didn't know about this, but my mom did, and now I'm not sure how to feel about it. On the one hand, it shows he cared in his own way, but on the other hand, it doesn't change the fact that he was largely absent. I asked him why he didn't make more of an effort to be part of my life. I understand needing to study and work in another city, but a call or text doesn't take much effort. Visiting once a year just wasn't enough. He looked ashamed and apologized. I told him I was willing to forgive but not forget, and that if we were going to build a relationship, it would be on my terms. He seemed sad but accepted my conditions. Next, I brought up my concerns about my mom. I told him how badly she treated me as a child, and that I didn't think she'd be a good mother to my sibling. I also said I wanted to go low or no contact with her. He looked shocked and said that when he left for college, she told him we had a great bond and that she'd been a hands-on mom. I told him that was a complete lie. I shared things she'd done, like demanding babysitting money from my grandparents for watching me and calling me annoying or disgusting to my face. He was clearly upset and said he'd talk to her. He also promised he wouldn't let my sibling be treated the way I was. That meant a lot to me. Before we parted, he told me that I'd always have a bedroom in his house, but that he understood I'd probably never live there. Then he got emotional and asked if, even if I didn't consider him my father, I would consider his baby my sibling. I said, of course. I told him I wanted to be an active part of their life. He started crying and asked if he could hug me. And this time, I let him. Update. So, a lot of you warned me about the inevitable fallout when my bio mother talked with my dad. Well, it happened. And let me tell you, it was even messier than I anticipated. Early in the morning, my dad texted me to let me know he was planning to confront my mom about everything. He reassured me that he believed every word I had shared with him and promised that he wouldn't let any of it fall back on me. Still, I braced myself. After everything that had already happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd come after me too, probably screaming and blaming me for everything wrong in her life. Honestly, I've reached a point where I truly don't care what she thinks of me, but the past few days had been so emotionally draining that I wasn't sure I could handle another confrontation. Reddit has been a surprising lifeline for me through all of this. Just having a place to vent and get advice has made a world of difference. A few hours later, the inevitable happened. My mom pulled into our driveway, stormed into the house, and immediately started yelling. She was furious, calling me every name in the book. She accused me of ruining her relationship with my dad and demanded to know why I had been blabbing about private matters that don't concern anybody. Her voice was so loud and cutting that it felt like it echoed in my chest. I stood my ground, though. I told her that my childhood does matter, to me and to my dad, who's about to become the father of her child. I told her that her actions had ruined her relationship, not anything I had said. That seemed to set her off even more. She called me an asshole and said I was the biggest mistake she had ever made in her life. Hearing that from her was like a punch to the gut. I didn't think she could hurt me anymore after all these years, but that one stung. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I told her that if it came to it, I'd do everything in my power to protect her baby from her because she's been a monster of a mother. That's when the screaming really escalated. My grandparents must have heard the commotion from the backyard because they came rushing inside. My grandpa stepped between us, his voice booming as he demanded to know how she could dare to speak to me that way. My grandma gently took my arm and guided me upstairs, where she sat with me as I fought back tears. She held me close and said all the soothing things only a grandmother can. Once I'd calmed down a little, she left to confront my mom alongside my grandpa. Even from upstairs, I could hear their voices rising. My grandparents weren't holding back. They told my mom exactly how they felt about her treatment of me, not just now, but throughout my entire life. They reminded her of all the excuses they'd made for her, thinking that as a young, inexperienced mother, she deserved some grace. But now that she's an adult, her behavior was inexcusable. They even said they were considering disinheriting her if she didn't make a radical change. My mom tried to argue that she'd had a hard life and was hurting, but my grandparents weren't having. They reminded her that they had taken on the responsibility of raising me so she could live her life without any repercussions or responsibility. Despite everything, they had always supported her, and this was how she repaid. They told her, in no uncertain terms, that if it came to a custody battle over her unborn child, they'd side with my dad, unless she showed genuine, sustained improvement. After they had been outside talking for a while, my grandparents came back upstairs with my mom in tow. Her face was red, and her eyes were puffy from crying. She gave me an apology through gritted teeth, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. My grandparents spoke on her behalf, saying she would start therapy immediately and that she was no longer welcome in their house. The whole thing felt surreal. Later, I called my dad to let him know what had happened. He was furious. He told me about his own confrontation with my mom, which apparently got pretty nasty. Still, he said he was willing to work on their relationship for the sake of the baby, but only if she made a genuine effort to improve her relationship with me as well. He made her promise not to contact me again until they'd spoken further, but knowing her, that didn't exactly inspire confidence. I told him to think carefully about what was best for him and the baby, and to not let today's events cloud his judgment too much. Honestly, though, I was exhausted. I didn't have the energy to think about what she might do next. One thing that's come up a lot in the comments of my previous posts is the suggestion that my parents only want me in their lives now so I can babysit for their new child. I get why people think that, but I want to be clear about something. I'm genuinely excited to have a sibling. Growing up, my family felt small. It was just my grandparents, and on my dad's side, I had a big extended family, but I always felt like the odd one out when I was around them. They were kind and welcoming, but I could never shake the feeling that I had a sign on my forehead saying, "That kid John had in high school." Having a sibling feels like a fresh start in a way. I can't wait to be a big brother, to be someone they can rely on, to show them what family should be. I know my relationship with my parents is complicated, to say the least, but my feelings about being a big brother are pure. I'm determined to be there for this baby no matter what. In the months since, things have settled down somewhat. My grandparents remain as amazing as ever, and I'm still living with them. We spent Christmas together, and it was wonderful. Exactly what I needed. My relationship with my dad has improved too. He's been paying for my therapy, and we've even done a couple of sessions together. It's helped a lot. He's finally starting to understand that he can't make up for lost time, but he can be present now. Instead of pushing for a relationship, he's letting me set the pace, which has taken a lot of pressure off. We've also bonded over my little sister, who we found out is going to be a girl. Helping him paint the nursery and build the furniture was actually really fun and gave us a chance to connect in a way we never had before. My mom, or egg donor, as I've taken to calling her, is in a weird limbo with my dad. They live together, but aren't really together. He's still angry about everything she's done, both to me and in general, and he's wary about what kind of mother she'll be to my sister. They're in therapy, both individually and as a couple, but she's barely polite to me when I see her. I can tell she blames me for ruining her perfect vision of a new family. What worries me most is the possibility that she'll poison my little sister's mind against me, or subject her to the same mistreatment I endured. My sister doesn't deserve to grow up around all this tension. So, it's been a while since I last updated, but recent developments have brought me back here to share how things have unfolded. First off, I want to thank everyone who reached out, messaged me, and kept me in their thoughts. It means a lot knowing people care, and having this space to vent has been incredibly helpful. To recap briefly for anyone new, my parents had me when they were teenagers. They left me to be raised by my maternal grandparents, who turned out to be the perfect family. My mother, or egg donor as I now call her, was somewhat in my life growing up, but she was toxic and nasty. My father was mostly absent, but remained a more positive, albeit distant figure. A couple of years ago, they got back together and tried to convince me, now 17, to move in with them. I refused, and when they announced they were expecting another child, I lashed out. That confrontation tore open a Pandora's box of lies and manipulation my mom had been feeding my dad for years, leading to a lot of fallout, mostly directed at me. Since then, my father and I have started building a stronger relationship. We've gotten closer, though I still have my guard up. My mother, on the other hand, gave me the cold shoulder throughout the rest of her pregnancy, and my dad was left questioning whether their relationship could survive. This brings us to the present. My parents' daughter, my sister Ella, was born not long ago, and she is the most beautiful, charming, and precious baby I have ever seen. I was in the hospital during her birth at my dad's request, and it was one of the most emotional moments of my life. Seeing her for the first time and holding her made me cry, and my dad cried too. It felt like a fresh start in a way, a chance to be part of a real family, even if it was frack. But my mom, she barely looked at Ella. She seemed almost irritated by her presence, passing her off to whoever was nearby so she didn't have to hold her for long. It was obvious to everyone that the maternal spirit she'd hoped would magically develop with this baby just wasn't there. Back at home, things didn't get better. My dad stepped up, handling everything from feedings to diaper changes while dealing with a constant flow of visiting relatives and friends. My mom, meanwhile, refused to even be near Ella. The doctors suggested postpartum depression, but my mom rejected the idea of seeking help or counseling. I tried to be patient and gentle with her, hoping it might ease her mental state. But the more I tried, the more detached and hostile she became. Then, a few days ago, everything came to a head. My dad left to run some errands, and while he was out, he checked the nanny cam. What he saw made him rush home immediately. My mom was cursing at Ella, and by the time he arrived, she was slapping the baby. He was furious, and when he confronted her, she said something chilling. "These kids are trying to keep us apart. We should get rid of them." That was it. My dad called the police, and my mom was forcibly taken for a psychological evaluation. When I heard what had happened, I rushed to his side. Thankfully, Ella was unharmed, but the entire situation left us both shaken. While my mom was in the hospital, my dad made the difficult decision that she could no longer live under the same roof as Ella. We couldn't risk her being near the baby. I suggested a plan. When my mom was released, she could stay with my grandparents and focus on getting treatment, while I would temporarily move in with my dad to help him out and avoid unnecessary drama. Ironically, all of this started because I didn't want to live with my dad, and now here I am. My grandparents keep me updated on my mom's progress. Her behavior is erratic. Some days, she's truly ashamed of what she's done and wants to rebuild her life. Other days, she's lethargic and unresponsive. And then there are days when she seems happy and talks about starting over. It's heartbreaking for my grandparents, who are struggling to cope with everything that's happened to their daughter. They visit almost daily to check on Ella and me, which has been a huge source of comfort. As for Ella, we've received an emergency court ruling granting my dad full custody for now. There will be further proceedings, but I'm hopeful the court will see that my dad is the best parent for her. He's been incredible, throwing himself into fatherhood with so much love and care. But even he is struggling emotionally. He's grieving the relationship he thought he had with my mom and the future he imagined for our family. Despite everything, He's mourning the loss of the woman he once loved. For me, school has been a welcome distraction, but I can't stop thinking about my mom and what she's done to Ella. If this had been an isolated incident, I might have been able to find some understanding or forgiveness, but given her history, I just can't. I feel like she's destined to be as toxic to Ella as she was to me, and I don't want her anywhere near us. That said, Ella has brought a silver lining to this mess. The rest of our family has rallied around her, and it's helped me connect more with my dad's side of the family. For the first time, I feel like I belong with them. Spending time with my cousins, aunts, and uncles has been a surprisingly healing experience. My dad and I are in a much better place now. He's been paying for my therapy, and we've done a few sessions together, which have been incredibly productive. He's come to terms with the fact that he can't make up for lost time, but is focusing on being present now. That shift has taken a lot of pressure off me, and it's made it easier to build a relationship with him at my own pace. Ella has been a light in the darkness. I've fallen completely in love with her, and being her big brother is the greatest thing to come out of all this chaos. I'm determined to be there for her, to protect her, and show her what it means to be loved unconditionally. She deserves so much better than the tension she's been born into, and I'll do everything I can to make sure she feels safe and supported. I wish this story had a neater, happier ending, but this is where things stand for now. Thank you to everyone who has followed along, offered advice, and shown kindness. Your support has meant more to me than I can put into words. Here's hoping for a brighter future.